72 hours ago, a barrel of Brent crude oil cost $67. 14. That number is now a relic, a fossil from a world that no longer exists. On Thursday morning, the Omani foreign minister stepped out of the Grand Hotel Kempinski in Geneva and told reporters and the markets and every energy trader on the planet that peace was within reach. His exact phrase. Those 4 words moved oil futures down $2, $30 in 11 minutes. Airline stocks climbed, defense stocks pulled back. The S&P 500 futures pointed green. Portfolio managers who had been hedging against a Gulf crisis quietly unwound their positions. The diplomats were still in the building. Progress was real. The worst-case scenario, the one that kept petroleum analysts awake at 3 a.m. running spreadsheets, had apparently been avoided. That was Thursday. This is Sunday. At 2:14 in the morning Gulf Standard Time, Iran launched simultaneous ballistic missile, cruise missile, and drone strikes against 27 American military installations across 6 countries: Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. Not a warning, not a demonstration. A coordinated multi-vector assault that American intelligence had failed to predict in the 48 hours between the Geneva handshakes and the first missile impacts. Operation Epic Fury, as Iranian state media named it within the hour, was the largest single-night Iranian military operation in the history of the Islamic Republic. And it began on the same calendar day that Oman's foreign minister had said peace was within reach. Within 4 hours of the first strikes, Dubai International Airport, the busiest international aviation hub on Earth, processing an average of 217,000 passengers every single day, issued a ground stop. Not a delay, a full stop. 400 flights were canceled across 48 hours. Emirates, Fly Dubai, British Airways, Singapore Airlines, Lufthansa, Air India, every carrier with routes through the Gulf either diverted or grounded. The economic cost of a single 24-hour closure at DXB runs to approximately $800 million in direct aviation and cargo losses. At 48 hours, that number exceeds $1. $6 billion before the secondary damage to the hotels, the logistics chains, the perishable cargo sitting on aprons across the Gulf. That number does not matter anymore, because the airport is the smallest problem. In Kuwait, the stock exchange opened Sunday morning and traded for 11 minutes before regulators triggered the 10% circuit breaker, the same mechanism that had not been activated since the Iraqi invasion of 1990. The Kuwait Stock Exchange, with a market capitalization of approximately $105 billion frozen in place. Trading halted indefinitely. The last time that circuit breaker fired, oil was at $30 and the world spent 7 months recovering. This time, oil is not at $30. The direction is the opposite and the speed is vertical. The UAE government closed every school across all 7 emirates, invoking emergency protocols that have no peacetime equivalent. Approximately 3 million students. Not a scheduled holiday. An emergency decree issued before dawn because the government understood, before markets fully understood, what the strikes on Qatari and Bahraini American installations meant for the next 72 hours of regional stability. In 30 seconds, the number that redefines everything about this crisis will become clear. But first, understand what is burning at Jebel Ali. Jebel Ali Port, located 35 kilometers southwest of Dubai, is not simply a large port. It is the 9th largest container terminal on the planet. It handles 5 million 20-foot equivalent container units annually. It is the entry point for 60% of all goods re-exported across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. Every construction crane in the Gulf region, every pharmaceutical shipment that moves regionally, every consumer electronics pallet that flows from Asian manufacturing into 50 countries. All of it passes through or transits near Jebel Ali. On Sunday morning, fire broke out in Terminal 3 after debris from an intercepted missile struck the outer edge of the container yard. As of the time this script was recorded, 3 container vessels were unable to berth, 17 were holding position in the anchorage zone, and the daily cargo throughput, which averages approximately $815 million worth of goods, had dropped to 0. The Port Authority has not issued a timeline for resumption. Shipping insurance underwriters have already declared the area a war zone. Ships operating in that designation pay premiums that, according to Lloyd's of London market data from comparable prior events, can reach 1 to 2% of the vessel's hull value per voyage. On a very large crude carrier worth $120 million, that is an additional $1, $2 to $2, $4 million per transit. That cost does not disappear. It moves directly into the price of every barrel those ships carry. Now the number. 14 million barrels of crude oil per day move through the Strait of Hormuz. Not 14 million barrels from one country. Not 14 million barrels from one region. 14 million barrels that are irreplaceable by any route, any pipeline, any alternative mechanism that exists anywhere on Earth today. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The inbound shipping lane is 3 kilometers across. 3 kilometers. the width of a small city neighborhood. And through that 3-kilometer corridor, 1 in every 5 barrels of oil consumed anywhere on the planet makes its journey toward Japan or China or South Korea or India or the refineries that ultimately supply every gas station from London to Los Angeles. The United States Congressional Research Service assessed this directly. Most volumes that transit this strait have no alternative means of exiting the region. No alternative means. Those words are not a policy warning. They are a physical fact. The Persian Gulf is a body of water with one exit. Everything behind it has nowhere else to go. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline can reroute approximately 5 million barrels per day to the Red Sea at Yanbu. The UAE's Habshan Fujairah pipeline can handle another 1.5 million. That is 5 million barrels per day with bypass capability against 14 million barrels per day of normal flow. The remaining 5 million barrels per day, have no route to any market on Earth except through the 3-kilometer corridor that is now, as of this morning, a war zone. Iraq exports 4 million barrels per day through the strait. Iraq has no pipeline alternative. Not a limited one, not an undercapacity one, none. Kuwait's 5 million barrels per day, have no alternative route. Qatar's liquefied natural gas, 22% of the entire world's traded LNG, sits behind the strait with no exit except through those 3 kilometers. Iran's parliament voted to close the strait after the June 2025 strikes. That authorization was never executed. As of Sunday morning, the Supreme National Security Council is in emergency session. This is the moment J.P. Morgan modeled. In their scenario analysis published in January 2026, a full Hormuz closure produces crude oil between $120 and $130 per barrel within 30 days. Oxford Economics pegged their most severe scenario at the same range and calculated that United States inflation would return to 6%, forcing the Federal Reserve to abandon any remaining rate cut projections for the year. But those models assumed a closure of limited duration. What no model adequately priced was the scenario now unfolding, where the closure does not begin with a formal declaration, but with the shipping industry simply refusing to enter a zone where 27 American bases have just been struck and Iranian fast attack craft are operating without constraint. Ships do not wait for a formal mine declaration. They wait for the insurance market, and the insurance market has already moved. The 1973 oil embargo took 5 months to cut global supply by 7%. It tripled the price of oil within a year. GDP in Western Europe contracted. The United States entered its deepest recession in 30 years. That disruption involved 6 million barrels per day removed from global supply. The current Hormuz scenario, even a partial functional closure, removes more than 5 times that volume. The 1979 Iranian Revolution disrupted approximately 4 million barrels per day for several months. Oil doubled again. American inflation hit 5%. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates to 20% to break it. 20%. A rate that would, in the current leveraged global economy, trigger a wave of sovereign debt crises from Karachi to Buenos Aires. China imports approximately 4 million barrels per day through the Strait of Hormuz. That represents roughly half of China's total crude imports. China's Strategic Petroleum Reserve provides approximately 90 to 120 days of emergency supply at normal consumption levels. But normal consumption levels assume normal industrial output. Chinese manufacturing does not reduce proportionally when energy supply is constrained. It shuts down. Factories that cannot run their furnaces or assembly lines at full capacity do not produce at partial capacity. The supply chain disruption that follows does not stay inside China's borders. It moves outward through empty shelves in retail stores worldwide within weeks. Japan is more exposed than China and has fewer options. Japanese customs data shows 95% of Japan's crude oil imports originate in the Middle East. 80% of those imports, approximately 8 million barrels per day, move through the strait. Japan depends on imported fossil fuels for 87% of its total energy. There is no domestic alternative. There is no geographic bypass route. Mitsui OSK Lines, one of Japan's largest shipping operators, was already shortening transit times in the Gulf before the first missile fired Sunday morning. As of now, their vessels are not entering the Gulf at all. South Korea sources 60 to 70% of its crude oil, approximately 5 million barrels per day, through the strait. Seoul maintains a strategic petroleum reserve of approximately 200 days. 200 days sounds substantial. It is not a solution to an indefinite closure. It is a window during which a solution must appear. India imports approximately 2 million barrels of crude per day through Hormuz, representing 40% of its total refining input. That crude feeds refineries processing fuel for 4 billion people. The transmission from a Hormuz disruption to Indian retail fuel prices is not slow or indirect. It is mechanical and fast. The 4 largest Asian economies, China, Japan, South Korea, India, collectively account for 69% of all crude oil flows through the strait, according to the United States Energy Information Administration. They are not peripheral to the global supply chain. They are its manufacturing and industrial core. Their energy costs determine the cost of every good sold in every retail market in the developed world. Keep that number in mind, 69%, because what comes next makes it worse. The cascading sequence from Sunday morning does not need Iran to formally close the strait to produce a $150 oil price. It only needs the insurance market to treat the strait as uninsurable, which it is already doing. When insurance costs make a voyage economically irrational, shipping companies reroute. Rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope adds 12 to 16 days to a voyage from the Gulf to Europe or Asia. It adds approximately $1, $5 to $2 million in additional fuel and time costs per voyage. Those costs move into the cargo price. Cargo price increases move into consumer prices. Consumer price increases arrive at the same moment that central banks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, are trying to decide whether they are looking at a recession or an inflation shock. Both are arriving simultaneously. The Fed's tool for fighting inflation is higher interest rates. Higher interest rates in a recessionary environment does not solve the problem. It deepens it. The Federal Reserve testified before Congress this month and specifically warned about geopolitical oil price vulnerability. They have no good option if oil reaches $130. They have no option at all if it reaches $150. $150 is not a projection from the script. It is what Oxford Economics describes as the outcome of a sustained closure rather than a brief one. The distance between $130 and $150 is the distance between a disruption measured in days and one measured in weeks. And as of this morning, nobody's offering a timeline for how this ends. On Thursday in Geneva, Oman's foreign minister said peace was within reach. Negotiators on both sides shook hands. Markets fell in relief. Energy traders who had been running worst-case scenarios quietly closed their spreadsheets and went to dinner. The diplomacy had worked. The crisis was managed. The assumption had never been tested. The IEA's coordinated strategic reserve drawdown capacity, deployed across all member nations simultaneously, provides approximately 111 days of offset against a full Hormuz closure removing 14 million barrels per day. 111 days is not a solution. It is a window. During that window, either the strait reopens or the energy infrastructure of 35 dependent economies begins to compress in ways that no reserve drawdown can prevent after the window closes. In 1987, Operation Earnest Will escorted Kuwaiti tankers through the strait under American naval protection after Iranian mines had turned those waters into a graveyard for commercial shipping. That operation required 7 months, 11 mine strikes on vessels, and the near sinking of the USS Samuel B. Roberts before Iran stood down. Oil at that time represented a fraction of the global economic interconnection it represents today. The financial system was not leveraged the way it is now. Inflation was not already elevated the way it is now. Central bank interest rates had room to move in either direction. None of those conditions apply in March 2026. 27 bases across 6 countries struck in a single night, only 400 flights canceled. A stock exchange frozen in Kuwait for the first time since Saddam Hussein's tanks crossed the border. Schools closed across 7 emirates. Jebel Ali Port, the economic gateway for 60% of Middle East re-exports, on fire. And the Strait of Hormuz, the single corridor with no alternative, no bypass, no workaround that carries the fuel on which the industrial output of the entire Asian economic bloc depends, now patrolled by an Iranian navy that has spent 3 decades preparing for exactly this moment. On Thursday morning, Oman's foreign minister stood outside a hotel in Geneva and said peace was within reach. The question that no analyst, no institution, and no government has yet answered, the question on which $150 oil, global recession, and the stability of every food and energy supply chain in 35 countries now turns, is how far out of reach it has moved in 72 hours. That answer is still being written, and it is being written in fire.